Okay, I need to just power through and finish this book. So sorry about all the time, all the days that I didn't read. I don't know why I'm saying sorry because I'm saying sorry to myself. I should try to be better about doing this most days, if not every day. Okay, page 693. Friedman, and I don't remember what was happening. Friedman and Jones had no inkling of what was happening until it had happened. With the expiration of his first term on the authority drawing near 6 years earlier, Friedman had sent a brief note reminding the mayor of that fact, and the mayor had promptly reappointed him. Now, expecting a similar sequence, Friedman, on June 15, 1945, sent LaGuardia a similar note. But when he received the mayor's reply this time, the key phrases that jumped out at him were, to his shock, "My dear Bill, splendid services, jumped out at him. Sorry, I don't really understand what this letter is, but my dear, so here are some key phrases from the letter, I guess. My dear Bill, splendid services. You were one of the pioneers. For some time, I have been considering the reorganization of the Tunnel Authority and believed the great economies may be effectuated. Therefore, I will be able to relieve you of your duties when your term expires." Friedman had been a good friend of the mayor's, Singstad recalls. Okay, so Friedman was one of the people on the authority, it looks like. And there were two. Okay, I'm kind of remembering now. Um, there was the Tunnel Authority, and Robert Moses snuck his like cronies into it. And it looks like Friedman was one of the people that was originally on the authority, and Jones was originally on the authority. Um, but then eventually Friedman's term expired, and there was a quiet takeover. Okay, Friedman had been a good friend of the mayor's, Singstad recalls. He was the most surprised man in the world. Understanding of the reason behind LaGuardia's decision came only when he read, in brief, inside page articles, that the mayor had announced that, in the interests of undefined economies, he had decided to merge the tunnel and the Triborough authorities, and while the details of the major refinancing and new bond issue required were being worked out, to interlock the two bodies by placing them under the same management, Triborough's management, as it turned out. For he appointed to the two tunnel authority vacancies Robert Moses and his Triborough sidekick, banker George V. the Fifth McLaughlin. And it's written George V. parentheses the fifth on parentheses McLaughlin. Okay. To try to gain the third vote on the board required on all major contracts, Moses shouted at Jones, a quiet, meek Quaker, at board meetings, and insulted him to his face. When Jones tried to counter this tactic by refusing to attend meetings, Moses wrote him, "There are just two courses open to you. One is resignation, the sensible thing for you to do. If you decline to do this, we shall have to ask the mayor to remove you on the basis of charges which we shall prefer. And these charges," he said, "will necessarily include reference to the various messes which the authority was in when the mayor decided to reorganize it." Jones, no politician. Wait, I need to write that down. It's just crazy that he's yelling at this random Quaker man. Okay. Jones, no politician, he had accepted the authority post only because it would give him the opportunity to render a public service, suddenly found that continuing to hold the job would involve his name in scandal. Even though no messes existed, the authorities' war-caused financial difficulties would make it easy to convince the public that they did, particularly if they were made public in the context of charges lodged against him. With his choices narrowed down to two, resignation or dishonor, on April 24, 1946, he resigned to be replaced by Charles G. Meyer, the other member of Moses's Triborough board. Fearson Shortridge, who for years had been meeting Moses on the Gracie Terrace promenade while the two men were walking their dogs in the evening, had believed, "We were very friendly personally." Also, I forgot that he had a dog. It's funny to imagine him walking his dog. Anyway, so he's really friendly with Fearson Shortridge. Now, he found that either he had been mistaken or friendship did not count for much with Moses. Moses fired him, appointing George Spargo in his place without a word of warning. I found out about it by reading the New York Times, Shortridge recalls. Moses also fired Ole Singstad, of course, replacing him as the authority's chief engineer with a Yale classmate, Ralph Smiley, and he fired men who had been no more than innocent bystanders in his long feud with the Norwegian, the engineers whom Singstad had recruited from all over the United States. For 9 years, Robert Moses had been seeking control of the tunnel authority. Now he had control. He had been unable to prevent the construction of the authority's Queens, Midtown, and Brooklyn Battery tunnels, but now those tunnels and their revenues were his. New York was a city divided by water, split by rivers and bays. Every modern water crossing within the city's borders, not only those above the water, but those beneath it, not only every bridge, but every tunnel constructed within the city's borders for use of motor vehicles since 1909, was now under the control of authorities that he controlled. More important, all new water crossings would also be under his control. The city was obviously not in the foreseeable future going to be able to build new water crossings itself. Only the authorities, his authorities, would be able to build them. He and he alone would be able to decide which crossings would be built and when, what their shape and design would be, and where their approach roads would run. He and he alone, moreover, would decide what tolls would be charged on their crossings. For with his takeover of the tunnel authority, he now possessed a monopoly over those public facilities for motor transportation within the city which produced revenue. America's 19th century robber barons had understood the importance of monopoly, absolute monopoly. They had not been satisfied until they had eliminated all competitors. Robert Moses, whose aim was not economic but political power, but whose power would have to rest not on political but on economic factors, had understood that competition was a threat to his aims. He had schemed for 10 years to remove that threat, to obtain over all modern water crossings within New York, the water crossings that were a key to all automobile transportation within the city, an absolute monopoly. And now he had that monopoly. Henceforth, for the remaining quarter of a century in which he would be in power, no motorist would be able to use a modern bridge or tunnel in New York City without paying his authorities tribute. Wow, okay, things are heating up. The struggles by which the industrial robber barons had built up their empires broke into public view infrequently. For the most part, only the results were announced. The battles which decided the results took place in secret. So did the battle which cemented Robert Moses' economic power. His public battles against the tunnel authority, his campaign of thundering press releases and barrages of statistics designed to persuade the city and its officials that the Battery crossing should be a bridge and not a tunnel, had failed. The battle in which he destroyed the tunnel authority was one shrouded from the beginning to end in secrecy. The stakes involved were vast. They included not only control of two of the largest public works projects in America, but also the right to build and control a public work that would be far larger than either, the Narrows Crossing. They included the right to award contracts for the completion of the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel, the Battery Parking Garage, and the Narrows Crossing, contracts that would total more than $500 million, with all the immense patronage and power that such a right conferred. And also the right to dispose of the immense annual revenue that these three projects in the Midtown Queens Tunnel would generate, revenues that by 1968 would be running more than $30 million a year. They included the capitalization power of this annual $30 million to build more public works that would generate more cash. Capitalization power that by 1968 would amount to $500 million more. And cash, even $500 million in cash, was only a small part of the stakes involved. The significance of the battle went far beyond economics. For at stake also was the issue of whether control of revenue-producing water crossings in the city would, in effect, be turned over to a single individual, of whether one man would be given a monopoly over all toll receipts paid by motor vehicles in a great city largely dependent on motor transportation. For concentrating economic power in motor transportation within the city in one man would give that man a voice in all transportation policies within the city at least equal to that of the city itself. But the city itself never was given an opportunity to learn the battle's significance or to watch it unfold. all during 1942, 43, and 44, while Moses and Singstad were maneuvering with RFC officials or LaGuardia, while Moses was smearing Singstad and the Tunnel Authority was clearing him. Not a single story on the maneuvering appeared in any newspaper. Not a word, even hinting at the existence of a behind-the-scenes conflict between the two public authorities, was printed. Also, hello. No, I haven't been to the New York Historical Society yet. It's kind of bad. I really should. Everyone's been going. They have like a whole merch shop with power broker type stuff. And I saw a poster, and so I don't know how real it is, of something called the Power Joker, and it was like comedy inspired by the Power Broker. So that might exist, but I haven't even done a Google search. I don't know. But yeah. I need to get back in I just need to get back in the swing of this. But also I just want to finish it. I just want to be done. But yeah, thanks for saying welcome back. Moses had repeatedly ridiculed not only Singstad's honesty, but his engineering ability. He had written LaGuardia, "We do not trust Mr. Singstad. We have another man, much more competent and much more reliable, to take his place." Whether he himself believed what he was saying may be judged by his actions. Singstad's plan for the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel were used with only one modification of any substance. And this modification, the use of a different method of waterproofing, caused the one engineering flaw in the tunnel, a persistent seepage that eventually had to be corrected by reverting to Singstad's method. Moreover, Moses' emissaries asked Singstad to continue with his plan for the Brooklyn parking garage down to the most detailed blueprints and contract specifications. Moses never discussed Singstad's plans with him. He went out of his way to avoid having to meet Singstad face to face. Singstad working on them alone in his own office. Singstad worked on them alone in his own office. But as each set was completed, Moses' engineers came to the Norwegian and took them and used them as drawn. Okay, so they're using his waterproofing method. Okay. Singstad took an office at 17 Battery Place, whose windows looked down on Battery Park, on the portals of the tunnel that was his greatest creation, and on Fort Clinton, whose site he treasured for another reason. Mr. Moses said it was going to fall down. The fiery Norwegian would laugh to visitors, pointing at the red walls that looked solid indeed. Well, it's still standing, isn't it? Its foundations are carried down to solid rock, you know. And then, one palm pounding on his desk, he would laugh, a short, harsh laugh that was more like a snort, and say, "Solid rock. I knew that." And Moses' engineers knew it too. If Singstad could still laugh, okay, good to know. This thing is still coming up. I didn't miss it. Thank you. Maybe I'll go. I probably should. If Singstad could still laugh 24 years later at the recollection of his fight with Moses, the laughs came noticeably hard, and this was understandable, for Moses' revenge on him was thorough. While Moses was completing the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel, he and Spargo took care to leave with reporters chronicling its construction the impression that Singstad had little to do with its final form. Most of the reporters' stories scarcely mention Singstad at all. When preparations for the opening ceremonies, elaborate preparations, not only the gleaming new parking garage and the white tunnel portals and access roads, but the facades of adjacent office buildings, including 17 Battery Place, were draped with bunting, flags, and mammoth pennons, and in a display of pageantry that transformed gray Lower Manhattan into a panorama of red, white, and blue, were going forward. Singstad had to watch them from his window and know that he had not even been invited to the opening of the tunnel he had designed. That's so mean. This book is like so it reminds me of Real Housewives or something, and I have never even watched Real Housewives. Everyone's just so petty. He was invited on the day before the opening, apparently only because a Herald Tribune reporter raised the matter with one of Moses' lieutenants, and Moses did not want any stories on the injustice. And when he read the brochure, 28 glossy pages, printed in 4 colors, distributed in the thousands to the distinguished guests who were to ride through the tunnel in a long cavalcade led by the mayor and Francis Cardinal Spellman, his cup of bitterness must have spilled over. The brochure listed 21 separate engineers as designers of facets of the project. The name of its true designer was not among them. Robert Moses could hate a long time. Ole Singstad was to continue practicing engineering until he died at the age of 87 in 1969, 24 years after Robert Moses forced him out of the Tunnel Authority. During those 24 years, Stingstad was to cement his reputation as the world's master tunnel builder and exhibit a genius for highway design as well. He was to build tunnels and huge highways all over the US and all over Europe and South America, receiving knighthoods and medals for his work in Norway and Belgium and Chile. But he was never, during all those 24 years, to design or build a mile of highway in New York City or New York State, the city and state in which he lived. Shortly before his death, he was asked about this anomaly by the author, who mentioned that at one time you were the most highly regarded tunnel authority in the world. Singstad's head snapped up and the palm of his unusually large right hand smacked down, and he glanced at the interviewer with a look that made it all too easy to see why Ole Singstad had been so dangerous an opponent. Yeah, he said, and I still am, and I'll tell you this. In spite of my reputation, since I retired as chief engineer of the Tunnel Authority, I told his Mr. Gumshoer boy that I wouldn't be happy working with Moses when he tried to talk to me into giving up my commissioners. Since I retired after 33 years in the service of some subdivision of the state government, 33 years. Since that time, the state has spent hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars on work that I have done and could do, but haven't had a single job from the state of New York. Not one. Just the other day, we were turned down for a highway job on Long Island. And I have been told by a friend in Albany, you are wasting your time trying to get jobs there as long as Robert Moses is living. Ever since I retired, he has been hurting me in the pocketbook. And he has been hurting me in the pride ever since. Singstad stood up with astonishing violence for a man in his 80s, walked over to the window and looked down. It was a bleak January day, and the wind whipping against the glass from off the upper bay was cold and bitter. It had piled snow against the red sandstone walls of the old fort. But the walls looked mighty solid at the same time, and Singstad muttered, half under his breath, all lies and fabrications, lies and fabrications. And then, after a while, he said aloud, I'm not sorry. A.B. Jones was a Quaker, and Quakers don't fight, but he was a wonderful man. He was a very wonderful man. All my commissioners were wonderful men. I'm not sorry at all. But then the old man fell silent again, looking over the battery and across the bay toward Brooklyn. And when he finally spoke again, after a long time, he spoke in a very low voice. And what he said was, ever since, ever since. Even after the war, no one would pay more than $20 million for the $48 million in Queens Midtown Tunnel bonds. Moses had said. That's what Moses said. Okay. As for the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel, he had said it would never sustain the $57 million in bonds it had cost. Such predictions of financial disaster, unless the Tunnel Authority was rescued by using the revenues from his profitable bridges to bail out its bankrupt tunnels, had helped Moses take it over. During the rest of his life, he would, at every opportunity, attempt to prove that this was in fact what happened. In reality, the Queens Midtown Tunnel had been earning almost enough to pay all expenses, including the interest on its bonds, practically from the day the war ended. By 1949, it was earning a tidy annual surplus as well. As long as he didn't control that tunnel, Moses had argued that improved access from Queens was unnecessary. As soon as he took it over, he said improved access was imperative. With the opening of his Horace Harding Expressway, forerunner of the Long Island Expressway, tunnel traffic soared, as Singstad had predicted it would, to levels at which its annual surpluses became huge. Moses had said that the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel would be lucky to carry 9 million cars per year. In its first full year of operation, it carried more than 15 million. Singstad's tunnel earned Moses $5,485,000 in tolls that year, more than was earned by the Bronx Whitestone Bridge, more in fact than was earned by the Henry Hudson, Marine Parkway, and Cross Bay bridges combined. In its first year of operation, in fact, the tunnel earned more than 20% of Triborough's total revenues, enough to sustain not $57 million, but $133 million in bonds. The two tunnels took off from there. By 1965, they'd be providing close to a third of Triborough's total revenue. Moses had predicted financial disaster for them. Instead, there was financial triumph. He said that they would have to be salvaged by the rest of Triborough's projects. In fact, if there was any salvaging to be done, it was not of but by Singstead's tunnels. Their huge surpluses helped Moses' profitable bridges, the Henry Hudson and Triborough and the Bronx Whitestone, salvage ones like the Cross Bay and Marine Parkway, which did not earn enough to amortize their bonds. Not that these facts deterred Moses, of course. In 1969, he wrote in Public Works, A Dangerous Trade, that, quote, the Triborough Authority salvaged the 2 tunnel bond issues. In effect, this meant pledging bridge tolls after all present bridge bonds were retired. Okay, next chapter, chapter 32, and also I'm on page 699. So really just if I'm just telling myself it's the home stretch. Okay, so quid pro quo, and it starts with a quote. No Tammany man can rise above the local machine. Governor Smith achieved that distinction, but Albany is a long way from the Bowery. A return to the city of Tammany would be a counsel of despair. People elsewhere would say that water cannot rise above its own level and that the level in New York is contemptibly and irretrievably low. Robert Moses, 1941. Okay. I have a good mug today. It's the Transit Museum Bus Festival mug. Sorry, it's like hard to hold to the camera. On the big desk in the far corner of the big room in City Hall, among the litter of maps and letters, corncob pipes and spare. I have never heard of a corncob pipe except in the Christmas song, with a corncob pipe. Anyway, I guess I didn't grow up in a family of smokers, so maybe that's why. So we're in a desk with spare eyeglasses and the narrow rack holding the 6 buzzers. There sat now, always, a small bottle of white pills. And more frequently now, the little man behind the desk would press both hands hard against his back and hold them there for long minutes, his swarthy face turned gray. Whether or not Fiorello LaGuardia knew in 1945 that he was dying of cancer, and no associate would be able to say for sure later whether he did or not. He was learning that pain could drain even his once limitless energy. Once talking with a reporter at the end of a long day, he suddenly said, with real surprise in his voice, "Well, I guess I'm tired too." And perhaps the 62-year-old mayor wondered whether he would be physically able to win another victory in the ruthless political arena, where weakness is not pitied but exploited. The odds against victory had never been longer. His frantic grasping for higher office and ludicrous posturing in his wartime jobs had eroded his popularity so deeply that in early 1945, a Daily News straw poll showed that only 1 out of every 4 New Yorkers favored his reelection. Roosevelt was dead. Truman, antagonized by his antics, if he sallied forth again against a Democratic candidate in a city in which 7 out of every 9 registered voters were Democrats, he would no longer be able to count on benevolent neutrality from the White House. Okay. Sorry, I'm just processing. That was a very dense sentence. A lot happened. Sometimes they'll spend like 10 pages talking about, like one line in a contract, and then other times the president will die and like the mayor will be debating change and get cancer all in one paragraph. Okay. And the candidate would be Tammany-backed William O. Dwyer, who had given him such a tough fight, LaGuardia, who had given LaGuardia such a, I believe, I don't know, who had given him, somebody, such a tough fight in 1941, who would be able to ride into the arena this time with a brigadier general's stars, bestowed for wartime service that looked good at least on paper, glittering on his shoulders, and who had led him in the news poll. The old coalition, which he had led out against the Democrats before, had dissolved behind him. Republican leaders, incensed because in his drive for personal power he had refused them patronage, were determined, once and for all, to deny him their party's domination. Reform leaders, men interested in principles rather than patronage, felt that he had, in maneuvers such as downgrading the City Planning Commission and ousting Kern and Sayre and Stanley Isaacs, betrayed those principles. The Citizens Union wanted another fusion candidate, but one with a new knight at its head. And when, in the spring of 1945, the mayor appealed secretly first to the City Fusion Party and then to GOP leaders for their endorsement and was humiliatingly rebuffed, he announced publicly that he had decided that 12 years as mayor was enough for any man, and that he would not run again, and that he would support instead an independent New Deal ticket headed by reformer Newbold Morris. Okay, I have two thoughts. One is that LaGuardia, he was the mayor for a really long time. But a second thought is that wasn't a very very novel idea, but 12 years as mayor is crazy. And it's crazy that FDR was the president for 12 years, and also kind of at the same time, LaGuardia was the mayor for 12 years. Like there was just so much of the same, and it's kind of at the same time. The other thing is that if you're running as the head of the New Deal ticket and you're a reformer, what better name than Newbold Morris? Your name is Newbold. Oh, Newbold is crazy. Okay. The events that followed that announcement brought the career of Robert Moses full circle. For Moses, who had so long and so violently despised Tammany Hall and all that it stood for, who had called Tammany a rotten political machine, who had spent the first years of his career fighting it, who had understood so well that the essence of the machine, the motivation of its leaders, men, he said, were interested only in dough, in obscurely making a living out of politics, never changed, who had asked so eloquently in 1933, do you think that the Currys, McCooeys, Farleys, and Flynns are in any essential respect different from the Murphys, McCooeys, McCabe's, and McCalls of the cartoons a generation ago? Who had warned voters in 3 separate mayoral campaigns that they must never let Tammany return to power? Who had said during the 1941 campaign that a return to the city of Tammany would be a counsel of despair? Who had said of Tammany's 1941 candidate, the same William O'Dwyer who is its candidate now, no Tammany man can rise above the local machine. This same Robert Moses, during the entire campaign, never once criticized Tammany or its candidate. His lone public statement ostensibly supported Newbold Morris, but also mentioned O'Dwyer favorably. And he supported O'Dwyer's running mate, Lazarus Joseph, whom LaGuardia called Flynn's messenger boy. Men who knew Moses were waiting for the quid commensurate with the invaluable quo he had bestowed on Tammany Hall. They did not even have to wait until the campaign ended. In a paid announcement over WJZ 4 days before the election, I'm assuming this is a radio station, a date selected to maximize election day impact while still allowing ample time for press reaction, O'Dwyer disclosed that shortly after his nomination in August, he had conferred with this valuable public servant and had asked him to be a part of his administration if he were elected, and not merely as park commissioner and Triborough Authority chairman. He had told Moses, O'Dwyer said, that if he was elected, he would immediately create a new post to handle a vast program of post-war public works construction, a coordinator of construction with sweeping powers not only over parks, parkways, bridges, and tunnels, but over the construction of public housing, the field from which Moses had been barred by LaGuardia. Over, indeed, the construction of all major public works of any type in the city of New York. He had asked Moses, O'Dwyer said, if he was willing to accept this post. I'm happy to announce, O'Dwyer said, that he has agreed to render this important public service. Disbelieving reporters telephoned Moses at his apartment. It's true, he said. Okay, so he's going to work under the Tammany mayor. Not that assuming that he wins. Not that O'Dwyer needed any help. He won in a landslide. Okay, but Moses's agreement provided the Tammany candidate with valuable protective coloration. Press reaction was precisely what O'Dwyer's advisors had foreseen it would be. His announcement was seen today as answering charges of waste should the Democratic ALP candidate win Tuesday's election, the Post reported. We like the announcement better than any news we've heard yet in connection with the mayoralty campaign, said the news. Big Bob the Builder Moses, is one of the ablest public servants in this or any other city. It would be tough to see him step out of the public service picture. Okay, I'm really, wow. So in 1941 or whatever this is, 1945, 1945-ish. Okay, so it's 1945, and the news is publishing a thing calling him Big Bob the Builder Moses. I'm so curious. Like, when did Bob the Builder start? Like, Bob the Builder, the cartoon, was that based on something else? Or did this, like, I'm so curious. Like, what was the first mention of Bob the Builder in the world? What is this? I'm just reading a book. It's called The Power Broker. It's really long. I'm on page 701. Okay. There was, however, puzzlement among the editorial writers. How could Robert Moses, the foe of corrupt machine politicians, the man who would never compromise his principles or make deals, who would not give politicians inside information or patronage or award contracts to political favorites, managed to run construction in an administration which would be dominated by elements to which construction deals, inside information, patronage, and contract favoritism were a way of life? The Herald Tribune, which was supporting Jonah J. Goldstein, the Republican liberal candidate, was careful to note that Goldstein had also promised to keep Moses on. Said that while the O'Dwyer statement is good politics and even better, it is a good common sense. A question still remains. How long? How long would Mr. Moses last under an administration that was dominated by the more raffish and corrupt elements of Tammany Hall? At a good guess, we would give him about 6 weeks. The original Bob was British? See, I don't know anything. Every day I learn so many things. The guess, off by approximately 15 years, was about as good as the assumption that underlay it, an assumption revealing only the depth of the misapprehension about Moses' true character. For the Robert Moses about whom the Herald Tribune was editorializing hadn't existed for a long time. The Robert Moses of 1945 was not the foe of the practical politician, but the essence of that peculiar animal. He was the complete realist, willing, in order to accomplish his purposes which in 1945 revolved around the retention and acquisition of power, to throw onto the table any chip he had in the election of 1945, with a chance to obtain more power than he had ever possessed before, thrown onto the table the most valuable of all chips, his name. The drama that was the relationship between Fiorello, Henry LaGuardia, and Robert Moses had been played out for 12 years in the brightest of spotlights. Its last scene was played out in semi-darkness, the gloom of an upstairs bedroom in the small, heavily mortgaged house in Riverdale. The only thing LaGuardia owned, besides $8,000 in U.S. war bonds, in which, 19 months after he left office, the wasted little bundle of a man that had once been the little flower lay behind drawn shades, waiting to die. Quote, when the mayor sent for me late in the summer of 1947, Moses had related, I was shocked at the change in him. He was in bed, so shrunken, so chap-fallen, and yet spunky, so obviously on the way out. To tell the truth, I felt like crying. Long after LaGuardia died, Walter Binger recalled for the author a conversation he had had with the ex-mayor in 1946, when LaGuardia had still been able to get downtown to his beloved engineers club for lunch. LaGuardia was eating alone in the corner, Binger said. I was eating at the center table, and I noticed that he was looking very gloomy, and after lunch I went up to him and I said, how's things, Major? He said he'd just been thinking about the city, and then he said, Moses has got too much power up here now. Binger, who hated Moses for what he had done to Isaacs, and who had hoped in vain for years that LaGuardia would take a firm stand against Moses at last, said that LaGuardia looked so unhappy while he was saying this that he was moved to put his arm around the little mayor's shoulders, but he couldn't resist asking as he did so, well, Major, who gave it to him? At that, Binger recalls, LaGuardia looked even sadder. Finally, he said, yes, but I could control him. Now no one will be able to control him. The first part of the ex-mayor's statement was not completely accurate. The second part was. Okay, so basically nobody is able to control Robert Moses. Dun dun dun. Now we're already at a new chapter. I think I'm gonna pause here, but I'll try to read again tomorrow. I just gotta crank it out. Okay, see you later.